Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. First of all, I will make a reservation. I have never been good at English, literature, or social sciences. I am a mathematician, an economist, and a businessman. Don't be offended by my inability to use flowery language or give teasing descriptions of people or events, because I'm the kind of person who says just the facts. In addition to what I described in the previous paragraph, I feel that I need to tell you honestly about my strengths and weaknesses, without false modesty about strengths, and without downplaying or embellishing weaknesses. I look very good, I am successful in business, I am trustworthy, I treat everyone with respect, regardless of their position in society, and I have almost always been honest. I am a very attentive lover and put my partner's satisfaction above my own. I am gentle during lovemaking. 6 out of 7 women with whom I have had sexual intercourse have always told me this, and I believe that this is a real plus. I left them quite satisfied with every meeting. For one woman who really liked being rude, I was a big disappointment. Also, perhaps because of some of the above characteristics, the parents of all the women I dated loved me. Sometimes I think mothers liked me more than daughters. Haha. As for my negativity, I am hopelessly not athletic and not very receptive. I am easily offended by negative comments or actions of other people. I have a subtle nature, and I often hide my emotions. Despite my average physical strength and agility, I avoid physical confrontation and am not aggressive enough in any area of life except business and investing. Despite my lack of aggression, I am truly vindictive towards people who harm me, and if I am not in physical danger, I seek revenge. The details of my communication with the 2 main characters of this story, Melissa Thompson and Dorene Bronson, in the distant past would not have made any contribution to this story and would have bored you, so I will tell you everything quickly and simply. I dated Melissa in college when I was in my senior year, but we broke up shortly before the summer. It was difficult for me, but not destructive because it was mostly mutual. She was more prone to commitment than I was, but she never hid it from me and did not cheat. I met Dorene the summer after my freshman year. Melissa, Dorene, and I attended different high schools in the same area, and all attended the nearest major public university. I dated Dorene exclusively in the summer and in the middle of senior year, when Melissa appeared on stage again. I chose Melissa. Dorene was depressed and didn't even attend the graduation ceremony, and I heard from friends that she moved out of the area shortly after graduation. I also met Dorene's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, after I broke up with her, as we had a good relationship with them. They realized how sincere my affection for Dorene was, and how difficult this decision was for me, and we parted on good terms. Melissa and I got married 6 months after graduating from high school and lived in the same metropolitan area where we grew up, in an apartment bought by her parents, Jack and Carolyn Thompson, as a wedding gift. Melissa's parents really liked me, even more than the parents of most of the other women I dated. Melissa's mother, Carolyn, always greeted me warmly and bragged about me in front of her friends. Jack, Melissa's father, not only loved me, but was also very impressed with my business acumen. He wanted me to go to work for one of his companies, but I told him that I wanted to separate my business life from his and go my own way. I never wanted anyone to assume that I got a promotion or responsibilities just because I'm a son-in-law. Despite the fact that I had never worked for him, after 2 years of marriage to his daughter, Jack insisted that I issue a power of attorney for Melissa's trust fund, somewhere around $15 million, since she had absolutely no business acumen. The trust fund money was supposed to go to her as soon as she turned 30, but I was responsible for every part of it, with the exception of preferred shares of one of Jack's companies worth about $3 million, which could not be touched until Melissa turned 32, and even after that there were restrictions. Married life has been good for me, despite the fact that I have learned something about Melissa that I never noticed during our courtship, which is not surprising, given my lack of insight. She was more materialistic and cared much more about her status in society than I had assumed before marriage. In fact, the way rich, successful, and upper-class people in our metropolis treated her was one of the most important things in her life. Despite the revelations about Melissa, which caused some concern, I was happy in our marriage. Melissa seemed to be there for me when I needed her, for example, vigilantly supporting me when my parents, my only relatives I cared about, died in a car accident after we had been married for 3 years. The money that I received from my parents' inheritance, after paying taxes and expenses, I put into an offshore account. I never told Melissa about it, and she never asked. We didn't need money to lead the lifestyle we wanted, but it was a significant amount of money, on the order of $1 million. I intended to tell her that I had transferred them to an offshore account, but I never gathered the courage. Maybe for some Freudian reason I didn't do it, I really don't know. When Melissa and I had just turned 29, our birth dates were only 3 days different, we decided that she would stop taking birth control pills and we would have children, which we had always agreed on since we got engaged. Even with my usual inattention, it seemed to me that when she stopped taking the pills, her libido increased. Despite the fact that she stopped taking the pills, she did not manage to get pregnant immediately. We both knew it would probably be at least a couple of months before she got pregnant, so it didn't scare either of us. As I mentioned earlier, I treat everyone with respect, which made me popular with the staff of the country club that Melissa, me, Jack, and Carolyn belonged to. In fact, I didn't play golf or tennis very often because I just don't have the necessary hand-eye coordination, but I enjoyed dining there, swimming and playing cards. Some employees loved and trusted me enough to come to me with business problems, and I always did my best to help them. Perhaps the friendliest employee I was friends with was Jasper, the captain of the waiters at the golf grill. One Saturday morning at the club, according to our standard procedure, Melissa went to a golf lesson, while I intended to swim and relax by the pool, as the week at work was particularly stressful. I lingered talking to a few people, and as I approached the locker room, Jasper came up to me with a very concerned expression on his face. "Brent," he said, "I insisted that all the staff call me by my first name, even though Melissa wanted them to call her Mrs. Willis. Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course," I replied, expecting that it would be about some financial problems that he had. Jasper took me to a secluded corner. There were tears in his eyes, and when I asked anxiously, "What happened?" he blurted out, "I hate to tell you this, Brent, but your wife is cheating on you right now while we're talking." "What?" I asked in horror. "I suspected this for 2 weeks, but today I became convinced of it. She's with Jeremy, an assistant to a professional golfer in a massage parlor. Obviously, the lock on the door is broken, but they don't know that. I opened the door by mistake and saw them, even though they didn't see me. Go take a look now." I'm sure the color drained from my face and I almost fell to my knees. I had to hold on to the back of the chair for a few seconds to regain my balance. Being a non-confrontational person, there was no way I would have challenged Melissa if I had caught them, but I had to know. I walked briskly to massage room A, which had a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. I opened it a crack. The lock didn't work, just like Jasper said. I closed the door behind me and collapsed on the floor. My mind was in a mess. To say that I was devastated would be an understatement for the entire decade. Finally, I came to my senses enough to understand. I need to get out of there. Hurriedly leaving the building, I walked past Jasper and was able to squeeze out, "Thank you for telling me, but please don't tell anyone else under any circumstances," before tears welled up in my eyes. Jasper replied with genuine concern in his voice, "I get it. Sorry." I drove in the fog until I came across an open bar. It was a relatively upscale bar in a pleasant part of town. In fact, in the suburb where Dorene's parents lived, next to several restaurants and clubs. I almost never drank strong drinks and rarely drank more than 2 glasses of wine a day, if at all. I was completely drunk, sitting alone at a table in the corner of the bar. By the time I stumbled out of the bar, it was already dark and I was completely drunk. My plan was to get into the car without buckling up, crash into a brick wall and crash to my death. Obviously, I didn't take into account the airbag. The last thing I remember is falling. I only know about what happened over the next 12 hours from other people's stories. I woke up in an unfamiliar environment. It was like a dorm guest room. I was wearing the same clothes I left the country club in. I had a splitting headache and otherwise I felt lousy. Unfortunately, I did not forget the reason for my indisposition, so I felt worse emotionally than physically. I slowly left the room I was in, found the toilet, and, having relieved myself, looked in the mirror. I looked as bad as I felt, including a big bump and a scratch on my head. I thought I recognized the second-floor hallway I was in, but I couldn't remember where I was. I heard the sounds of cooking and people talking on the ground floor, so I stumbled down the stairs. I was shocked to see Dorene's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, in the kitchen. "Well, Brent, I'm glad to see you're alive," Tom said, looking at me over the top of his reading glasses and putting down the newspaper. "Hi, Brent. Breakfast will be ready soon," Lydia chirped, standing at the stove. "Tom, Lydia, I have no idea how I got here," I muttered. "Have a seat, Brent," Tom said, getting up and helping me sit on one of the kitchen chairs. And I'll tell you this story. Thanks, because I don't remember anything after I left the bar last night, I guess, and tried to find my car, I muttered. Tom continued to tell my story, and Lydia added comments from time to time. Anyway, Tom and Lydia were going to meet friends at a restaurant located about a block from the bar I left. When they were walking to the restaurant, they saw the guy fall and hit his head on the sidewalk, and came over to help. When they realized it was me, Lydia went after their friends. They and their friends helped me into the car and drove me to their home, canceling their dinner plans and ordering a takeaway with their friends. I am very, very grateful to you for helping me, I said. I am especially grateful to you for bringing me here, and not to the detox or the hospital. When Lydia brought pancakes and juice to the table, she replied, "Considering what you were mumbling, we thought it would be better to just bring you here. Eat some food. You need it." "What did I say?" I asked, completely confused. "It can wait until after breakfast," Lydia replied, serving me a stack of hot pancakes. At breakfast, the three of us talked about a lot of things, but not about last night. Of course, I asked about Dorene, and I was told that she had been married for 3 years, but now divorced and returned to the area, living only 15 kilometers away from them. She was a successful entrepreneur. "Is she still as beautiful as she was in college?" I asked wistfully. "You'll have to judge for yourself. She'll be here soon," Tom replied. "What?" I cried out. "She shouldn't see me like this." "She won't mind," Lydia replied casually. "She can't wait to see you, especially if what you mumbled last night is true." Breakfast was finished by then, and after I helped clear the table, the three of us moved into their living room. "What did I say last night?" I asked timidly. "There's no point in talking about everything," Tom said thoughtfully. "Let me focus on the main points, rather, on the little-known ones. Your wife Melissa cheated on you. You would never have started a family under such circumstances. You drank strong drinks for the first time in 2 years to drown out your sorrows, and you planned to commit suicide. Does that sum it up?" "It's close," Lydia replied with a puzzled expression on her face. I covered my face with my hands. After about a minute, I looked up. "I am very, very sorry to burden you with my problems," I said, barely holding back tears. "I really, really don't know what I'm going to do, but I probably would have killed myself last night if I could have gotten to my car. I think you two know that I'm very emotional," I continued, panting. "Sensitivity is a quality I've always admired in you, Brent, but maybe you're too sensitive for your own good," Lydia said, coming up to me and taking my hand. After we talked in general terms for a few more minutes, the front door opened and Dorene came in. Except for the blonde streak in her hair, Dorene looked pretty much the same as the last time I saw her 8 years ago. If anything, she looked a little better. I was very nervous about what her reaction would be to me. I got the most pleasant surprise of my life. "Hi, Brent," she said in such a joyful voice that it seemed to me as if my breakup with her 8 years ago had never happened. "You look terrible," she giggled, "but I still need your hugs." She held out her hands and I took them. She lifted me off the couch and hugged me tightly. After a few seconds of apprehension, I hugged her back and then started sobbing. Lydia diffused the situation. "I think you two have some catching up to do." "Tom and I are going to go shopping at the mall and we'll be back in 2 hours," Lydia said, squeezing my shoulder. I seriously doubt Tom planned to go shopping on Sunday morning, but he pretended it was the most fun thing he'd ever done, and they hit the road. As soon as they left, Dorene got straight to the point. "Brent, you know we've both always been honest with each other. Are there any reasons why this should change now?" After a short pause, looking into Dorene's beautiful brown eyes, I hesitantly said, "No. I really need a friend right now, someone I could be honest with." "Good," she said with a smile. "Let me get started. My marriage broke up because my husband cheated on me. However, I can't blame him too much because I'm sure he felt that there was only one man I had ever loved or would most likely love someday, and it wasn't him. It was you. From what my parents tell me, I may have a chance to get you back, and if I do, I intend to take full advantage of it. I don't think I'd be more stunned than if I'd been hit with stun gun electrodes." I'm sure my mouth was open and my eyes were the size of baseballs when I seemed to be speechless for a long time, all the while looking into Dorene's eyes, and she looked back at me. Finally, she broke the silence. "Is that straightforward enough for you?" she asked with a wry smile. "Yeah, I'd say it was definitely quite straightforward," I chuckled. "It seems like I made the wrong choice 8 years ago," I continued. This is the right attitude. Now let's get this sorted out, Dorene continued with a big smile. Let's sit down at the kitchen table and take notes on how everything will happen next. So we went to the kitchen. Dorene took out a notebook with a pen from a drawer in the living room, and we got down to business. Obviously, last night, when I was in a drunken stupor, I was a complete idiot because Dorene seemed to know all the important details of my situation. I just clarified something for her. In our conversations, I made it clear that I want to get back at Melissa for real, no matter what else we do, and I want to be as far away from her as possible. By the time Tom and Lydia returned 2 hours later and brought Dorene and me 2 full pots of coffee, Dorene and I already had the general principles of a plan of action. While developing this plan, I constantly repeated my need for final revenge and the dissolution of the marriage. She told me she would do anything to help if only I would stay with her, and ideas flooded in. Each of us has compiled a list of things to do, a list of things to avoid, and a list of possible serious mistakes. We promised to meet for lunch every other day to clarify the situation and see how we cope with the tasks set. In fact, we only had to trust 2 people, Tom and Lydia. Well, maybe Jasper too. None of us had any problems trusting Tom and Lydia, and it was an honor for them that we trusted them. We told them exactly as much as was necessary. I thought I could trust Jasper too. The most pressing problem was to explain to Melissa how and why I had been gone since yesterday afternoon. That is, for more than a day. Since I looked terrible, including a bump and a scratch on my head after I passed out on the sidewalk, we were sure it was doable. Dorene drove me to where I left my car. Fortunately, she was safe and sound. I left my mobile phone in the car. I checked the messages on my mobile phone, among which there were 10 from Melissa and 1 from her father, Jack. The first, in chronological order, was from Jasper. "Hi, Brent," Jasper wrote. "I just thought I should let you know that I saw Melissa. She asked if I'd seen you. I told her that you had an emergency and you were looking for her everywhere, including on the training field, but you couldn't find her or Jeremy, so you left, instructing me to tell her that you would contact her as soon as your emergency was resolved and to take a taxi home. She looked very upset, but she completely believed my story. Good luck, kid, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help." The messages from Melissa and Jack were about the same, with a growing level of concern about my whereabouts. Dorene and I decided that I would call Melissa, tell her that I had been attacked and taken to the clinic without documents, that I'll be home in about an hour. I called. Melissa's voice sounded excited when she picked up the phone and at the same time relieved. I interrupted the conversation. Dorene and I kissed, not passionately, but not just as good friends. "I have to stay loyal to Melissa until our plan comes to fruition," I told Dorene. "That doesn't surprise me," Dorene said with a big smile. "However, once that happens, I'm going to use you to death," she sneered. "Woe is me," I replied dramatically. "The only thing that worries me is whether you can behave properly with Melissa so as not to arouse her suspicions," Dorene said. "That's what worries me the most, too," I replied, "considering how emotional I am. But you gave me the courage to do it because I know that there is a pot of gold at the other end of the rainbow. I'll find a way," I said with a determined expression on my face. Dorene smiled. We exchanged another quick kiss and I left, first to buy Plan B pills and a disposable phone at the pharmacy, and then home. Melissa and her parents were on the verge of hysteria when I got home. My appearance gave them no reason to doubt my story of the attack, as my head injury was real. My clothes were dirty and disheveled, and my hair was matted. I hid my wallet in the car and pretended that I needed to get new credit cards and a driver's license because they had been stolen, although fortunately my car keys were not there. The presence of Melissa's parents helped. I probably wouldn't have been able to handle it if they hadn't been there, as my anger boiled over at the sight of Melissa. But I remained relatively calm and played the disoriented victim to the end. Considering her actions on Saturday, I was really surprised that Melissa seemed very sincere in her concern for me, and there is no doubt that she did not sleep last night. She looked almost as bad as I did. Her parents decided to stay the night. After Melissa and I took a shower and had dinner with food prepared by her mother, Carolyn, we passed out again and fell asleep. I got goosebumps when she put her head on my shoulder, but I got over it, and in a few minutes I was in an incredible country. For the next 3 weeks, everything went mostly as Dorene and I had planned. Dorene, like no one I've ever seen, was diligent in her tasks. After 2 lunch meetings with her, I was left in no doubt that I should have married her, not Melissa. All my old feelings for her returned with renewed vigor, and I was amazed by her dedication, competence, and efficiency. There was a lot to do, and it wasn't easy. Since it was difficult for me to interact with Melissa, I wanted to stick to the schedule despite a lot of minor setbacks. In order not to arouse suspicion and satisfy her increased libido, I even made love to Melissa 8 times. Every time I imagined it was Dorene, and the morning after each session, I crushed a Plan B pill and added it to the breakfast I lovingly cooked for Melissa, and watched her to make sure she ate it before I left for work. I wouldn't want to have a child with her for the world. It sounds strange considering how terribly upset and devastated I was when I witnessed Melissa cheating. But 3 Saturdays after that terrible event, I was hoping Melissa would start cheating again. I needed her to change in order to carry out my plan. Using the disposable phone I bought at the same time as the Plan B pills, the first thing I did was call Dorene on Saturday morning to make sure everything was going right. And so it was. I kissed Melissa for the last time when we parted on a Saturday morning at the country club. She went to her golf lesson and I went swimming. I tracked down Jasper, made him promise never to tell anyone that he had told me about Melissa's cheating, or that I had witnessed it 3 weeks earlier, and gave him $10,000 in cash. After waiting another 20 minutes, I secretly removed the Do Not Disturb sign from the door of Massage Room A and made sure that the lock was still broken and that Melissa and Jeremy were inside. Then I turned to the director of the club's training center and the chief golf specialist for help, ostensibly in order to find Melissa, desperately telling them, "I have a very urgent situation." I persuaded the other 2 to have the chief golf specialist open the door to Massage Room A. As expected, Jeremy's golf pro assistant was there using Melissa doggy style. I noticed the condom again. Thank God for the little favors. The top golf pro blurted out, "What the fuck?" And the director of the training center gasped loudly. I screamed, "Melissa!" A completely distraught expression appeared on my face, which was not difficult to do given the circumstances, and certainly did not require any action on my part. And then I turned and ran, sobbing. The sobbing was a sham, even though my heart was bleeding inside. As I was leaving the training ground, I heard the head golf specialist yelling at Jeremy. I drove home quickly and left a note with my wedding ring already prepared on the kitchen table. I also left my regular mobile phone there, as I didn't want to risk being tracked by it. 2 weeks earlier, I had my location devices disabled on both my car and laptop. My laptop and suitcase with the only things I appreciated, a few souvenirs from my parents, as well as several changes of underwear and socks, were already in the trunk of my car. My note said, "I loved you more than my life. I can't live with your betrayal. God save my soul." I do not know how Melissa managed to get home so quickly, but she got there before I left. I would have preferred not to meet her, but in May, everything turned out for the best, as she partially satisfied my thirst for revenge. Melissa was really panicked. She kept grabbing me, and I kept pulling away. She tried to make eye contact with me, and I avoided it. The only thing I said in response to all her hysterical tirades was a truly emotional answer to the last question. "Tell them that you killed our love and me." There were tears in my eyes as I pushed her away from me and ran out the door. One part of my revenge required me to act on Monday to make sure everything went well. As in most institutions, money transfers cannot be reliably confirmed on weekends. Dorene rented a hotel room in her name in a busy area of the city, and I parked my car in a remote part of another hotel, about a block from the one where she and I stayed on Saturday and Sunday. Although Dorene and I slept together and were gentle during the 2 nights we spent at the hotel, I had to supposedly die before it could happen, but I knew that once it did, it would be incredibly passionate. In accordance with our plan, I changed my appearance as much as possible in the time allotted to me. Dorene cut my hair much shorter than I usually wear, dyed it blonde, and styled it differently. I put on blue contact lenses to hide my usually green irises, and glasses with simple plastic lenses. I put on a professional blonde mustache that looked completely real, and put on the clothes Dorene bought for me, which were very different from the ones I usually wore. On Saturdays and Sundays, Dorene and I went to the cinema next to the hotel, ordered room service, and discussed our plans over and over again in order to memorize every detail. On Monday morning, I made electronic transfers of assets worth about $12 million from Melissa's trust fund, which I legally fully controlled, to 6 different charities, for which Dorene and I received all the necessary information about the transfer electronically. 5 transfers were made, the 6th was not, and there was no time to try to get information about another charity, so we had to limit ourselves to 5 transfers. One of the 6 charitable foundations was created by Dorene a few years ago, and she still exercised operational control over it. After we transferred the money and received confirmation that it had been fulfilled, Dorene drove me to my car. That's when there was a serious glitch in our plans. I underestimated my father-in-law's determination and influence. Obviously, he sent almost all law enforcement officers in the city to search for my car, because when we got to it, there was a patrol car right next to it, in which a policeman was sitting. We needed my car because it was specially modified to fulfill the main part of our plan. We made some contingency plans, including buying a masquerade for Dorene and a spare costume for me. Quick-witted Dorene immediately came up with a solution. She changed her clothes, ran to the patrol car, and in desperation told the officer, "There's a guy with a gun in the lobby of the hotel." The policeman immediately turned on his radio and drove from the remote part of the parking lot where my car was parked to the main entrance of the hotel. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran to my car, jumped in, and Dorene and I went to a remote coastal mountain road where I changed the guardrail. The emails were designed to be sent every few minutes. It took us about an hour to get to the right place, and by then all the emails would have been delivered. Dorene did a great job of composing the emails, still using some of my catchphrases and other writing features, so that they seemed to come from me, but were much more concise and effective. The letters mostly said that I was too weak a person to survive the betrayal caused by my wife's cheating, and apologized for the fact that I passed away without saying goodbye in person. The emails contained statements about pain and torment that I felt much more effectively than I could express, although these statements expressed my true feelings 95% accurately. The letter addressed to my father-in-law, Jack, was the most touching. I apologized to him for the fact that my need for both suicide and revenge was so great that I undermined his trust in me by emptying Melissa's trust fund, and hoped that he would find the strength to forgive me eventually. Anyone but the most inventive researcher would have concluded that no one could have survived the fall from the cliff, and that the human body might never be found. And of course, there was no way to predict exactly where it might end up, unless it was smashed to pieces by waves and rocks or eaten marine life. My car was modified in such a way that, with remote control, the accelerator rod in the engine compartment moved forward. But when it reached the end of the stroke, a small explosive device was activated, which most likely destroyed it. We looked through binoculars until we were sure that there were no other vehicles in sight. Then I parked my car so that it was facing the fence and was about 30 meters from the place where the bolts of the fence were loosened. I turned on the remote control to make the car pick up speed. When my car hit the weakened guardrail, the inertia was just enough for it to break through and fall off the cliff, landing in the ocean 100 meters below. Dorene and I also disabled the driver's side airbag in my car, and soaked my blood and tissues in the part of the leather upholstery of the steering wheel that my head could hit in the event of an accident. We also applied my fresh blood to the leather upholstery of the steering wheel, but soaked it to make sure that some blood would remain in case the fresh blood was washed away by the ocean waves. The windows of the car were open, the seatbelt was not fastened, and my wallet was lying freely in the car. So at some point it will surely float to the surface and hopefully will be retrieved by divers. As soon as we saw the car fall into the water, we got into Dorene's car and drove away. We drove 600 kilometers that day, and another 600 the next, paying for everything in cash, until we reached the destination city, where Dorene arranged to receive a document that would help establish my new identity. We spent the first 2 days and 3 nights in our original destination city in a hotel room. This time we didn't just order room service. I quickly discovered that Dorene had not only gotten a little prettier over the past 8 years, but had also become significantly more passionate. Before we left our hometown, Dorene received a certified copy of the birth certificate of a child named Alex Simmons. Alex was born in a rural area where there were no computer records, just a year before me, and died shortly after his birth. In our original destination city, using a photo with my new appearance, we purchased a fake Australian passport in the name of Alex Simmons. Dorene found out that Australian passports are the easiest to forge, and 2 weeks ago she found an experienced specialist in our original destination city. My fake passport was in perfect condition. It even had fake stamps about a trip to Thailand and from 2 other Asian countries, a fake stamp about entering the United States a month ago, and a shabby look. This would readily confirm my story that I am a Native American who moved to Australia as a child and was now returning. With my new birth certificate and passport in hand, we leisurely drove to our final destination, located on the opposite coast from our hometown. We made it a point to make love in every state we passed through, even if it was just for an hour at a motel. When we got to our final destination, we rented an apartment and finally decided on plans to start our new life together. I have already transferred the money I inherited from Brent Willis's offshore account to a new offshore account in the name of Alex Simmons. Using my birth certificate and Alex Simmons' Australian passport, I was able to open a US bank account and transfer some money from an offshore account to it. 6 weeks later, I had my driver's license, credit cards, and all the other usual identification documents. 6 months later, Alex Simmons had an American passport. During our journey, escaping from my old life, we regularly communicated with Dorene's parents, and also checked online sources for stories about Brent Willis. Things weren't going well for Melissa, because 3 weeks before my demise, I received only $30,000 in cash, and all this as a result of transactions that seemed mostly legitimate and not real cash transactions, since it was not an excessively large amount given my lifestyle. And since none of my banks had absolutely no activity, credit card or brokerage accounts assumed I was dead. From everything I've understood, the public condemnation of Melissa and Jeremy has been extremely harsh. Of course, Jeremy immediately lost his job, and everything indicated that the country club's chief specialist would make sure that he never got a golf-related job anywhere in the United States again. It was reported that he left town a week after he was caught with Melissa. Melissa was an outcast in high society circles. She even suffered the humiliation of being expelled from the country club, although she would undoubtedly have resigned of her own accord. Attempts by local reporters to interview her were unsuccessful, and there was no indication that she had ever left the premises that used to be our apartment. Unfortunately, the implementation of my plan led to the fact that Jack and Carolyn, Melissa's parents, suffered. I always knew that they liked me, but I didn't know that they loved me like a son. One quote from Jack, published in the largest newspaper in the city, brought me to tears. "Our beloved son is dead. His wife betrayed him. Please respect our privacy and allow us to grieve our terrible loss." Dorene and I had just started a new life in our apartment when Tom and Lydia informed us that Jack and Carolyn were going to hold a memorial service for me. Dorene decided that she would attend the service and flew from our new city back to her hometown. When Dorene returned, I realized that she was hiding something from me about the ceremony. She tried to take it lightly, but I wouldn't stand for it. A couple of days later, when I molested her, she tearfully told me how terrible it was. People I didn't really know seemed to care a lot about me. It was a very solemn event. Jack broke down several times trying to deliver the eulogy that his brother was supposed to finish. Carolyn looked heartbroken and sobbed softly throughout the service. Melissa wasn't on it. It was reported that she was in a psychiatric clinic. Melissa's family not only made no attempt to return the $10 million that I had sent to charity from Melissa's trust fund, but also donated another $2 million, the amount that I intended to send, but could not, to another charity on my behalf. My memorial service took place 4 years ago. I was officially declared dead 2 years after that. Dorene and I got married as soon as Brent Willis was pronounced dead. Now we're Mr. and Mrs. Simmons. When we got married, we already had a little girl, and now we have a little boy on the way. Dorene and I have no money problems. In addition to my inheritance, we have money from the sale of Dorene's business to her employees and the salary we receive from the charity we work for. Since the charity Dorene founded received a $2 million donation, they have had enough money to hire her as a permanent chief operating officer and me as a CFO and investment consultant. Thanks to charity, we were able to help hundreds of low-income families and get great satisfaction from our work, including by expanding our activities every year. Tom retired, and he and Lydia moved to a place located just 20 kilometers from our house to be near us, and especially with their granddaughter and future grandson. I love Dorene more than I ever loved Melissa, and she loves me more than Melissa ever loved. It makes me feel guilty for not choosing her after college. All this mess with Melissa and her family could have been avoided. I stopped trying to figure out what happened to Melissa, Jack, and Carolyn. The news was never good and only increased my guilt. The last I heard, Jack and Carolyn established a scholarship in my name at the college that Melissa, Dorene, and I attended. Melissa got out of the psychiatric hospital after 6 months of treatment and left. Dorene and I couldn't be happier with each other and with our life together, except for one thing. We couldn't feel more guilty than we do because of how successfully my revenge was carried out. Now we know that even the guilty Melissa, not to mention the innocent Jack and Carolyn, did not deserve what we did to them. I wish I wasn't such a cowardly shit. Didn't stand up to Melissa and just divorced her. End.